Amparo Arechabala, a woman who has overcome exile, loss, and defeat. She stands here today telling her story of her life in Cuba while there was peace and prosperity, but also about being exiled with nothing on her or her husband's back. We were able to talk about the many obstacles life has thrown her way and how she has been able to overcome it all. Also, we were able to talk about how the show named The Amparo Experience has completely changed her life entirely. The Amparo Experience has been widely regarded throughout the city of Miami, and people can't seem to get enough out of this experience.
My name is Amparo Arechabala.
So, when the revolution in Cuba began, how old were you?
I was 23 years old when the revolutionaries came down to Havana.
What was the experience of being exiled from your home?
It was horrible. It was horrible. We didn't want to leave Cuba. My husband, Ramon, didn't want to leave. He kept on saying, the one that's got to leave is Fidel, not me. This is my country. I want to stay here. So, of course, he was totally mistaken. We didn't realize the gravity of the situation. You know, we were continuing with our life as if nothing was going on. And then a couple of years passed, and in the December 31st, 1963, we were having a New Year's party in our house, and we were preparing the house. And all of a sudden, 10 cars came from the military, and like about 40 soldiers came into the house, saying, we understand there's a lot of liquor in this house and we are going to take it. So my husband said, no, there's no liquor in this house. Of course there was liquor, but we were having a party, but it was hidden. They didn't see it. So since they couldn't take anything with them, they said, okay, so you're coming with us. And they put him in prison.
What was it like when you left Cuba? What was the emotion of everyone around you?
It was horrible because, like I said before, we were not planning on leaving. And then when he was in jail, they gave him several options. If you stay here, you're going to prison forever. And then my husband said, well, I haven't done anything. How can you put me in prison? And they said, oh, it doesn't matter, we'll figure it out. We'll put a cost in you. Or you can go to the farms and cut sugar, the plants, or you can leave Cuba immediately.
Now, when you left Cuba, you had a very, very, very young child. What was it like going to a foreign country with a young child?
Well, the day we left Cuba was horrible. He was only 2 years old, my son Miguel. And he was very, very attached to his grandmother and grandfather. And my father was sick at the time with Parkinson's disease, so he didn't came to the airport with us. But my mother and my aunts, I had a lot of aunts and uncles, they all came. And my son was inside the room that was covered, in glass, where they put the passengers, and he was like this in there because his grandmother was on the other side. He wouldn't stop screaming. It was very, very difficult, very difficult. And when that plane took off, finally, we looked out the window and I said to Ramon, my husband, take a good look because you're never going to see it again.
Now, you went from Cuba to Spain to Philadelphia and then Miami. Why go to those places first where most immigrants at the time were all going to Miami from Cuba?
By the time we left Cuba, there was no diplomatic relations with the United States. They had cut that off. And therefore, there were no American airplanes flying into Cuba, Havana. It was the only place that, they could land. So the only airline that was authorized was Iberia from Spain. So we had no choice to go to Spain because it was the only way of getting out of there, and they wanted us out because they said we were undesirables to the new regime in Cuba. That was the word they used, undesirables.
A couple years back, a new campaign started called the Rio Havana Club. So they made a theatrical experience called the Amparo Experience. Who directed and who wrote this play?
Oh, this play was directed by Vicky Collado, a director that she has even been in Broadway, and the script was written by Vanessa Garcia, who's also, they are both of Cuban origin. So for them it was a magnificent task to write about this and direct this show. So that's how it started.
Now, can you tell me a little bit about the show and how has it changed your life over the past couple of years?
It has. It really has. First of all, I'm honored and blessed to be a part of this, because I think that for the Cuban community, especially here in Miami, it's very important that they hear, you know, what happened there, because there's a lot of young people, a lot of years have passed. And, you know, the young generation, even though they've heard it from their grandparents, they haven't actually lived anything like that. So with that in mind is that this play, you know, started. And that's exactly the way it appears to the Cuban community. Like they want to hear, you know, because they have heard it before from their family, but they have never experienced the real thing.
Now, the show started last April. Here we are 7 months later. Why do you think they keep extending it? Why do you
Because
think they want to keep
it's
going?
such a success that the month of April and May, which was the original idea, was sold out in 1 week. Then they extended it May and June. And that was sold out in a weekend. And so on and so on and so on. So they keep on going because it's been sold out ever since.
Now, if your husband was still here today, what do you think this would be like for him? How do you think he'd feel about this Amparo experience?
Oh, he would have been, I have no words to tell you what this would have meant for him.
What do you think is next for the Amparo experience? Now that it's closing in the next 2 weeks.
It's closing the next 2 weeks, and the cast is totally heartbroken. Totally heartbroken. I was there yesterday, and they actually were in tears. They were in tears. They hugged me and they kissed me, and they said that everybody said thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So I have in mind that in the near future, this is going to go either to here in the United States, to New York again, which was a great success when they went to New York, or to places where there's a big, heavy Cuban community, like Chicago, like New Jersey, a lot of places that I'm pretty sure is going to be a success. That's what I think is going to happen.
Now, what do you feel like when you go to the show and you see all these people adoring you and want to take pictures with you, and then you look at the show and there's an actress playing you from 45 years ago? What is that like?
No, much more than 45 years ago. It's unreal, to be honest with you, to see this couple, Amparo and Ramon, when they met in 1957. And, you know, they carry on exactly the same conversation that we carry on. Because, of course, I met with them many, many times. And the first time I saw it, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. And still, I have tears coming down my eyes.
And not only is you and your children being able to view this, but also your grandchildren. How many grandchildren do you have?
I have 9.
You have 9 grandchildren, so they were all able to see the show.
They all have been in the show several times, and they are all going to go to the closing, and they have been very much a part of, you know, the whole success of the show. And they loved it, and they were very emotional about it, because of course, you know, some of them weren't exposed to the situation in Cuba, to be honest with you.
And how do you feel emotionally and mentally that this is it, the show's stopping?
I have mixed feelings. I have a feeling of happiness, and like I said before, I'm honored, I'm blessed, and I look the way they do to me, and I feel like saying, I haven't done anything. Why are you doing all of this? So I feel very sad and very happy. Very happy for the success, but very sad to see that it's going to end. Yes, I think that that night it's going to be very emotional for me.
So before you even met your husband Ramon in Cuba, what was Cuba like at that time?
Before I met Ramon, it was in the 50s. I met him in 1957. Cuba was, I mean, unbelievable. The generation of my age, we were young, we were under 20 years old, and there were big country clubs, there were big places like Varadero Beach, you know, big resorts, and there we were, of course, went to school and we graduated high school, and then I went to the University of Villanueva and to obtain an interior decoration degree, and you know, there were a lot of parties and birthdays, and they were celebrated in grand style. We always wore long dresses, and the boys always had either a tux or tie and a coat. We used to wear long gloves down to here. I mean, for these really important parties. Other than that, it was very safe. So it was in contrast to what happened after January 1, 1959. And it was a delight. I mean, we went our way, we went, a lot of friends, we had so much friends, we got together, and our parents, my father was a doctor, and he tried to give me everything that he could, and so I went to these clubs, and I had a life in contrast to what happened later, totally the opposite.
So all the friends that you had growing up back then in Cuba, some of them are still even your friends today. When they went to the show, what was their experience?
Oh my goodness, they were all crying their head off. They were crying all the time because my friends that I have here in Miami, we went to school together since we were little. So we've been friends for, 50 years, more? And it's unbelievable, and they all feel very close to the story because they lived through it. Some of them, others left really early, but most of them stayed, you know, a little bit longer, and they lived the comparison. There's no comparison.
And in the Amparo experience, the audience most of the time is not what you would think it'd be. Most of the time, it's people in their 30s or 40s. Why do you think that it has gotten such a connection with a younger age?
Oh, because they have heard it. They have heard it the same way that my grandchildren have heard from their parents and grandparents. You know, their parents, of course, some of them were born in Cuba, others no, because a lot of years have gone by. And they know the story. Like yesterday, I was to the show yesterday, and this lady, she must have been in her 50s, and she was crying. She hugged me and she said, thank you. I came to the United States and I was 3 years old. She was there with her husband, a lawyer. Her husband was a lawyer. And she said, I have heard all of this from my grandmother, and I relived everything today, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart, because it meant so much to me to see, you know, the real thing, because they put up a splendid actuation.
So when you went from Philadelphia to Miami, what was your life like economically?
Well, it was pretty tight because my husband, he worked with the company, the Havana Club Company in Cuba, and he had a hobby of putting cars together and dismantling them and putting them back together. And that's how he earned his living, as a mechanic. He worked as a mechanic in Philadelphia and then in Miami also.
Now, the Amparo experience doesn't only attract Cubans to the show, it has also attracted Venezuelans and people from other origins.
Oh, of course.
Why do you think it's gotten such a it's reached out to so many different people?
Oh, because there's a lot of countries in Latin America that have gone through the same situation or worse. And there's a lot of immigrants here in Miami, and they see this as something they lived in their country, and they love it. They love it. They love it. They think it's a fantastic thing, the story, because they have been exposed to something very close to what they are going to see in the show.
Now the show, is the show everything you thought it'd be? Is it more? Is it less?
No, I had no idea what it was going to be. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. I kept on saying, what is this? I don't believe this. It's so real, but so real. And the part that I like the best, the part that touched my heart, it's a voice, a very, very low voice, starts singing the Cuban national hymn, the anthem. And then everybody starts very softly, and then, you know, the entire audience picks up, and everybody's shouting the Cuban national anthem. And to me, that part was that, I was in tears, Many people have never heard the national anthem after they left Cuba. So it really touched their hearts. To me, that part was what really touched my heart.
So you said that your grandchildren have all seen the show. Why is it important for them to live through this experience, but not only them, to other kids? Why is this show so beneficial towards them?
Okay, because my grandkids have heard the story from their parents. And even though it's, you know, a generation in between, they are very much attached to the Cuban culture. Some of them, not all of them, because I have grandkids that have been raised, you know, out of Miami, and they've heard this story, but they are not exposed to it like those who lived in Miami, or those, you know, that could come from other Latin American countries that are friends of them, and they hear, for example, me say a story, or they ask me a question, and even though they are not Cuban, but they have lived that experience. And for them, it's very important to know exactly what happened. It's very important.
And going from your kids' perspective, what do you think the show means to them?
To my children, they were very, very touched by it, even though they had never been in Cuba, and they never guess we'll go back to Cuba while this government is there. And they've heard the story from us, you know, and from my parents. And they are more involved in the history of what happened to Cuba and what happened to us than the grandchildren. Because, you know, a lot of years are between grandchildren and kids, and my kids. And, you know, for the grandchildren, it's even more important to see exactly what happened and to live, you know, through that show where there's the music and there's the actors that saying and acting things that are very, very touchable to your heart.
Now, the Amparo experience hasn't only touched the hearts of adults, but it's also touched the hearts of children. Why do you think people from, per se, my generation are more attracted to this than maybe even their parents?
Well, one thing that is going on in Miami with your generation, they have heard the story of Cuba, you know, through the entire youth. And now they all want to go to Cuba and see it. And a lot of families, the three generations, the grandparents, the parents, and the grandchildren are visiting Cuba. And they are totally heartbroken because they have heard, you know, the good stories of the parties and, you know, the way we lived. I mean, in a normal society. Nothing out of extraordinary, but in a normal society. And what they see now, like I have a friend that she took her father to Santiago de Cuba, and she says that they were crying the whole time they were there. His father was crying to see how everything is destroyed, how they haven't kept anything, everything it's horrible. So they had a very bad experience, and I've heard that throughout your generation a lot, because that now, for some unknown reason, the Cubans they want to visit Cuba because now it's open and you can go with dollars. And for some reason now that it's open to them, they want to go and see. But they're not going to see the life that I had. They're going to see something entirely different.
Now, ever since the day you and your husband and your child left Cuba, have you had any intention of going back and visiting? Because maybe your grandchildren didn't live through the horror you lived through, but maybe they would like to visit Cuba. Do you have any intention of going back?
No, not ever. While this government is there, even if it changes, I'm not going back to Cuba. My parents are gone. The rest of my family, they're all gone. And I was thrown out of Cuba because I was undesirable to that regime. How can I go there now and see Cuba? So I'm never going back, never going back. And I told my husband, he always said the same thing, I'm never going back to Cuba. I said, neither am I. We were undesirable, so how are we going to go there? I have family. I have a cousin in Sagua La Grande, which is where my parents come from. And my goodness, I haven't seen him in, I don't know, almost 50 years. And but I'm not going back. I understand that some person that is young enough that have heard, through his entire life about the life before, but that's not what they're going to see. The life before doesn't exist. It's gone. What they're going to see is destruction, trash. And even though this government is trying to make it very appealing because they need the money, not me. I'm not giving them a cent. To anyone who has ever loved and lost, to anyone who has ever carried a secret in their hearts, longed for justice, sought freedom, to the spirit of our lives, take Ramon's secret, take the truth, share it. It's in your hands now. It is impossible to stop. Salud.